the usual suspect. Apologies. We did not were unable to make our two most recent live broadcasts. That was on Sunday night and on Monday morning, all due to power challenges. So please do accept my sincere apologies on that front. But nonetheless, I hope you had a wonderful weekend because it was a great weekend of football. Plenty of action did happen across Europe, of course. As we speak, we're into halftime of that game between Manchester United and Everton, who are down to 10 men, are leading by a goal to nil. A brilliant strike scored by Keenan Drisbury Hall. You remember the Everton signed this one in the summer from from Chelsea, where he had only started two Premier League games on the back of last campaign, for which it was his only season at Chelsea, having been signed from Leicester City at the request of Enzo Maresca, for whom he had been integral when he was helping Leicester City to their promotion to the Premier League for the 2024-2025 Premier League season. So, anyways, guys, I do hope you're enjoying that action because it's ongoing as we speak. But like I've said, the game is into halftime. I've seen Jordan Pickford was forced into a very brilliant save by Jordan Pickford. Patrick Togu missed a golden opportunity in there. I think Amadou Diallo had another attempt blocked. I think that block came from James Tarkowski and things like that. So it's been a very beautiful, wonderful game really to watch. But usually there is a cliche in football that is often said that it's worse to play against 10 men than it is to play against 11. And the reason as to why I say it's a cliche is because, apologies, just having our audience tested to make sure everything does check out. Like I said, like really, you look at it and think to yourself, how is it better to play against 11 than it is against 11? Sorry, than it is against 10. It's like I said, it's a cliche in football. And will Everton stand a chance with that red card? I mean, we can only wait to find out, but they do take the lead through Keenan Drisbury Hall. And I think Keenan Drisbury Hall, Ilman Ndiaye, and Jack Grealish have had a really decent game. Same goes for Michael Keane, who was involved in that altercation with Idris Ganagay that resulted into a red card. Now, I did not get to see the live incident of the red card. Now, I got the chance to review the incident before coming on air. And I mean, I find it quite particularly odd, particularly stupid, particularly unsporting. Now, it's normal for players of the same team to get into, a disagreement or an altercation over something that has happened on the pitch. But for it escalating so fast that one teammate has to swipe their hand in another's face, because it did appear like almost a slap from Idris Ganagay's left hand. And I'm thinking to myself, guys, come on. It's your fellow teammate, it's your teammate. I mean, when it comes to stupid sending offs, that's as bad as it comes. That's as stupid it comes, Colin says, bro, you're handsome, thank you. Colin says, Soka, hey man, I hope you have a good day and bless you. That is Luke Bodman. Good to have you on the channel. And then we also have one of our usual suspects in Alex Alinaitwe there, an Arsenal fan. So anyways, so we're going to digest that and what happened, of course, in the weekend. I thought that Everton, of course, had a very strong starting, lineup. But usually when it comes to game predictions, rarely do we predict that you're going to receive a red card in as early as the 13th minute of the game, and that of course puts the other team to the numerical disadvantage. Although, like I've said, there is a cliche in football that you're better off playing against 11 than it is against 10. Now, what basically that tends to mean is that players tend to put in the double effort to when they are down to 10 men, to say literally every other player on the pitch is trying to fill the void that has been created by their own player that has been sent off. Now, on a given day, that works out, but more often than not, it does not. It does not, because once you go down to 10 men, you're bound to get beat, especially when it's that early in the game. When it's that early in the game, and you ought to give yourself a fighting chance, and by you reducing yourselves to 10 men, it doesn't give you the fighting chance that you'd have really hoped to have, and that's why it was very stupid for Idris Kanake to find himself in that kind of position with Michael Keane, and in any case, I think David Moyes will be very, very furious with his players for what he just watched in that particular incident. Because, I mean, I don't know. Even as a manager, you must be sort of baffled that it's just happened. You must be baffled. And as penalties come, I wouldn't be surprised if Idris Ganagwe makes this week's wage through fines and things like that. Anyways, but in terms of paper, Manchester United are without Matthias Cunha, of course, because he suffered a knock in training, so do not expect to see him in today's game. Of course, it does come a little too early for Benjamin Sesko, as well as Harry Maguire, who are out injured. But again, nothing has changed in terms of their own setup. It's a back three. Seny Lomans in goal. Lenny Yoro, Matas Delit, Luke Shaw. Lenny Yoro being a suspect in failing to clear that ball. In fact, he sort of deflects it in the right path for Keenan Risbury-Hall to take a beautiful and very strong shot, for which Seny Lomans puts his fingers to it, but it's too strong. It beats him and ends up in the back of the net. Then, of course, in the wing backs, you have Nusa Mazarui and Patrick Dogu, a double pivot of Casemiro and Bruno Fernandes, who by the way conceded possession in a very dangerous area before causing Brian Mbomo to make a foul against Keenan Risbury-Hall, who then gets booked with a yellow card in that game. I think it's the only yellow card we've had so far in the game. And then Amadou Diallo is playing as the other number 10. Predominantly you've been seeing Amadou Diallo being played as a wing back. Today he's playing as a 10. And Joshua Zirkzee is leading the lines as the striker. Now, I think if you're Joshua Zirkzee, today is like an audition for you. For a player like Joshua Zirkzee, today is like an audition. And the reason as to why I say it's like an audition is simply because we know he doesn't get to play as often as he would love to. He doesn't get to play as often as he would love to. And now that you've been given a chance, particularly in the absence of Benjamin Sesko, you ought to show what you're worth. You ought to show what you're capable of. Give a manager a reason to trust you, and possibly even trust you ahead of, the preferred Benjamin Sesko. And we know, even on different occasions, that in the availability of Matthias Cunha, we wouldn't be surprised that Matthias Cunha would have started ahead of Joshua Zirkzee. Now, it's not to say that that's an indictment on Joshua Zirkzee, but it's to say that perhaps he is not proven himself trustworthy enough to be leading the Manchester United line even ahead of Matthias Cunha, who we all know is predominantly a 10, is predominantly a 10. So really, for me, I think he needs to take this opportunity, and not just today, but in the subsequent weeks, for if he is afforded, any playing time. Of course, it's not to say that if Everton sort of beats Manchester United, then it means that he's not capable, but he needs to give a manager a reason to choose him for their next game. Because the disadvantage for Manchester United players that are part of this squad is that because they are out of cup competitions, and particularly that's the EFL Cup, and they are waiting for the FA Cup that comes in January, and they're nowhere in Europe, that means they are limited to one game a week. So that means the entire squad of about 25 players is looking forward to being selected for that one game that comes once in a week. And even if it's gone, I know at some point, I think possibly the first week of December, we're going to have midweek games as far as the Premier League is concerned. But even then, I mean, that's too short a period for Man United team to be, doing rotations, because it's not going to be like, Man United are suffocating on an overload of fixtures compared to the likes of Arsenal, Crystal Palace, who are going to be playing in the Premier League, playing in the EFL Cup at some point at the quarterfinals, and then going back to their respective duties in Europe in as far as the UEFA Champions League and the UEFA Conference League are concerned, where they do represent respectively. So really, for Man United as a player, any opportunity that you're given, you need to showcase what you're capable of. And I think one of those players who has tried to do that to a certain level, maybe not as effectively as you would love to see it, that player has been Mason Mount. So Joshua Zirkzee is leading the lines there for Man United. Anyway, on the side of Everton, they have Jordan Pickford, Vitaly Mykolenko, Michael Keane, James Tarkowski, Seamus Coleman, Idris Gana Gueye had started, but he has been set off. That leaves James Garner in that midfield, Keenan Barry-Hall, Jack Grealish, Ilman Ndiaye, and Tony Barry, who I thought have done really, really well to represent the team. Now, of course, unfortunately for Everton, they had to be forced into an early substitution when Jack O'Brien was taken off and they brought in Seamus Coleman. Now, Everton are going to have a very long second half. First of all, if you're Everton, one of the strategies you have to deploy is you have to be very effective in defending, which they've practically done fairly well. Because it's not to say that they've been perfect, because Man United created some goal scoring opportunities. They were just not that effective with those chances. Now, you ought to defend really well. And then once you win the ball back, you ought to be very quick going ahead, because Man United are going to overcommit numbers. And we've seen that in some instances in the first half. They're going to overcommit many numbers on the transition or up front to try and get the advantage. So that means they could leave gaps in behind. So if you can get at them really, really fast and hope that the likes of Tony Barry can help you gain the advantage, then maybe you get a chance to get a second goal. Then the other thing is that we've seen they've had some long throw-ins. You ought to leverage on those, really, really take advantage. And then in the other case, I think they've been really, really good at fighting for the 50-50s and also trying to win back the ball high up the pitch. There's an incident where they do that with James Tarkowski, and they get to go back, to have another attempt on goal. And I think they've done that really well. I thought David Moyes will be impressed in terms of how they've applied themselves. Of course, majority of the statistics are not going to be on their side, as has been the first half in indication, with 63% of ball possession going to Manchester United and only 37% being left to Everton. But I mean, we've known this to be cases for where a lesser team is playing against the dominant team. A quick example is that game against Nottingham Forest for Liverpool over the weekend. Liverpool had, I think, about 70-something% ball possession, and yet they still lost the game by 3-0. It was a game of moments in itself. Nottingham Forest creating those moments and going on to score. So practically, that's what Everton should look to leverage on. In terms of shots on target, it's been 2 in favor of Manchester United compared to Everton is 1, which has resulted into the goal. United have had 4 shots on target. Like I've said, they've created goal scoring opportunities, but they've just not been quite clinical with those chances. And Jordan Pickford on the other side has done well to make those 2 saves to keep Everton in the game, and he ought to be on the top of his game for the second half if he is to bail out this Everton side that have been reduced to 10 men going into the second stanza. So keep your eyes peeled to that. Now, quickly, as we wait for the second half to return, let's run into what else transpired in the course of the weekend. Slightly, I did not note that Liverpool got beat by 3-0. Now, for one, for those of you that chanced yourself into watching my review of the Arsenal and the Liverpool game slightly over in that 10 minutes video that I managed to publish today, you ought to remember that I mentioned some of these things. Nottingham Forest has become one of those bogey sides for Liverpool. Liverpool have not beaten them in the last, the game for the Man United game is back for the second half, but Liverpool had not beaten them in the last 3 games, losing 2 and drawing 1. And whereas I thought, even I for one, that Liverpool were set to bounce back, and possibly I gave them a chance to win the game by 2-1. I was disappointed that it took until the 78th minute for Liverpool to get their first shot on target, and that was through Dominic Dominic Soboslai, who by the way started at right back in the absence of Jeremy Frimpong and Conor Bradley, who got injured during the course of the international break. And then Alexander Isak had, I think, his worst performance in a Liverpool jersey. 0 shots on goal, 0 dribbles, 0 everything, really. He conceded possession, I think, about 6 times. He just had a very, very poor game. And I must say, I was a bit disappointed with Arne Slot that he started with Alexander Isak. Now, I understand the price tag places him as the de facto leader of that team in terms of the striking role. And also, his own Premier League pedigree put him at that level, But given how the season has started, I think Hugo Ekitike started the season off so well. The only thing you will critique him for is that red card he got himself during the EFL third round game against Southampton when he came off the bench to score in that game. So I think he's done enough to warranty a starting slot in that game, in a Liverpool team, as they wait for Alexander Isak to find his footing, So Arne Slot will, and like he said, he has a good set of players. It's up to him to get the best out of them, really. And we will be waiting to see whether he can indeed get the best out of him. Now, there are some rumors that have started circulating, according to Graham of the Daily Telegraph, alluding to the speculation that Liverpool could turn to Ange Postecoglou should they look to make a swap of managers, with Arne Slot being shown the exit. Now, I do not want to believe that rumor. I'll take it. I don't know if I should treat it with contempt, because football is that kind of thing that can surprise you when it comes to rumors. But I do not see a way that Liverpool employ Ange Postecoglou. I do not see a way Liverpool fans welcome Ange Postecoglou. Some were already skeptical about Arne Slot, and it took him winning the Premier League title last season, and how at least they started the season. I think they lost about only 1 or 2 games in his first 21 in charge across all competitions, or 19, thereabout. So it took that kind of run of form for them to be sold that he was a man worth the salt. Now, guess what? Fast forward, they are having a repetition of what happened to them in the 2020-2021 Premier League season, on the back of them winning the Premier League title under Jurgen Klopp in the 2020 season, 2019-2020, and they lost a set of 6 games out of 7. They lost to Leicester City, they lost to Fulham, they lost to Chelsea, they lost to Manchester City. Who else did they lose to? I'm trying to recall. But they lost. Out of 7, they lost 6. And the only game they won during that run was against Sheffield United, who they beat by 2-0. And of course, even in the UEFA Champions League, they were winning games, because among the victories they had was beating up against RB Leipzig by 2-0. And I think the other game was against Real Madrid, which I think possibly ended in a draw. I stand to be corrected on that one. But they had a poor run of form in that spell. Now, that spell came between, I think, February and March, in as far as Liverpool were concerned. Now, the reason as to why I draw reference to that particularly is because something similar has happened to them on the backdrop of them winning a Premier League title. And suddenly, contrary to the sentiments they had during that time on Jurgen Klopp, they have started to call for Arne Slot's head on the spike, And I do feel it's too early or premature for them to be calling for his head on the spike, really. So I understand the frustration as a Liverpool fan, or putting myself in the shoes of a Liverpool fan. I understand the frustration that they've had to go through, bearing in mind the expectations that they lay on this team, given the kind of quality, given how much they spent during the course of the summer, in as far as on the back of winning a Premier League title, then you go and make your biggest spend in a transfer window of close to half a billion pounds, and then suddenly you've fallen so far off because all your new signings are yet to gel in. Isak, Florian Wirtz, Frimpong has been out injured. Giovanni Leone has been out injured. Then you have a drop in form for Virgil van Dijk and Ibrahim Konate. Alson Ramses Becker returns from injury for every month, and then he's not good enough. At least did not appear good enough on the day to bail Liverpool out or to keep them in the game, and because it could have easily ended 4-0. Because Nottingham Forest will feel hard done by that goal by Igor Jesus was cancelled out for what they termed to be a handball, contrary to what I saw, at least based on the angles that I was able to see, and that sort of thing. So they practically had a very, very poor game, Ryan Gravenberch, Curtis Jones, McAllister in that midfield, it just did not work, it just did not work. Cody Gakpo in that team, Mo Salah in that team, Isak in that team. Of course, they withdrew, I think, Ibrahim Konate early enough to replace him with, who was it? No, it wasn't Kiesa, but, I'm struggling to recall. But he was withdrawn early enough to sort of sacrifice a defender to put more energy in the attacking, positions. And guess what happened? Ryan Gravenberch was forced to pull backwards to help Virgil van Dijk as though playing as a centre back. In a sense, it just did not pay off. It felt like a huge gamble on a day that did not pay off, that did not pay off. So really, I mean, Anna Slot felt like a man, like a drowning man, clutching on straws, Yes, Ibrahim Konate paved the way for Hugo Ekitike, to try and add attacking power to that team. And then they lost the balance of the team. Then they ended up, withdrawing Milos Kakes for Andy Robertson, Federico Chiesa came on for Alexander Isak, and then Curtis Jones paved the way for Rion Gomoha, but nothing they could do against Nottingham Forest because Nottingham Forest were really, really brilliant. Morgan Gibbs-White among the goal scorers, as well as Morito and Savona. Beautiful game for Nottingham Forest. Very, very poor game for Liverpool. The United game, like I told you guys, is already back for the second half, and they've made a change in their starting 11. That's for Man United. They introduced Mason Mount. I'm trying to find out who was withdrawn for Mason Mount to come on. I'm trying to find out who they withdrew to make that change. Mason Mount with the header, heading that ball wide. Yes, Nusa Mazraoui was the player sacrificed for Mason Mount to come on. What that means is that then Amadou Diallo appeals to the wing back, and then Mason Mount plays as the second number 10 alongside Brian Mbeumo, with Joshua Zirkzee leading the lines. Incredible, things. Of course, what's his name? Ruben Amorim is trying to gain is a tactical advantage. Also, in addition to the numerical advantage that they already have. But I thought that Man United have been a bit sloppy in that midfield. They played a couple of loose balls that make you think that they're a bit panicky. That's what it felt at some point. They've acted so desperate to try and get back into the game as quickly as possible, which of course they need. But in that sort of rush, in that adrenaline rush of trying to get things correct, to try, because if you tell somebody that Everton are leading and they are the ones with the man less, then it sounds a bit odd, So they've tried to rush it to try and, get that equalizer that then puts the game all back to square, and then they go ahead and try to win it, which has caused them to make some mistakes in there. So do I think Man United can win this game? Obviously they can. One, they're at home, and if anything, this season they've been really, really good at home, by the way. But they lost to Arsenal on the opening weekend. I do not think they've lost another game at home. All the other losses have been away from home. We saw that against Brentford. We saw it against Manchester City, and things like that. But so I think they could get that. And the funny thing about such games is that Everton could hold on to that dear lead until like the 80th minute, when players start cramping, when they're really, really tired because they're having to overrun, and not just in midfield, but across the entire pitch. one, in winning the ball back, in chasing that ball, in trying to do all the tackles to slow down or destabilize Man United's tempo, or to prevent them from having that bit of momentum on the ball. So when it comes to those later minutes of the game, of course, players are bound to sort of get tired and, a chip off, and that's when they become more vulnerable, and then they concede and equalize, and before you know it, they end up losing the game. But it's always a hard, painful take for a team to go through such a scenario, but it is what it is, So let's wait and see how things go in that game. But so far, their efforts have not paid off in as far as trying to find an equalizer is concerned. We're into the 56th minute of the game there. Anyways, in the other game of the weekend that is worth reflecting on was the game between Manchester City and Newcastle. We know for a fact that Newcastle beat up against Manchester City on the day that seemed very, very frustrating for Pep Guardiola. Now, for those of you that care to remember, in the build-up to that game, Pep Guardiola had said the season officially begins now. Well, and the reason as to why he says that, or he said that, was purposely. Meanwhile, Man United are looking to do a double change, bringing on Kobe Mainoo and Diego Dalot there. So, meanwhile, the reason as to why he said that was, ever since the Premier League season started, we've had, a sort of start-stop kind of play because of the 3 consecutive international breaks between September, October, and November, And now that we've completed the international breaks in as far as 2025 is concerned, the next coming, of course, having to come until March 2026. That means it's going to be almost 4 months of constant football in as far as Premier League football is concerned. You have teams are going to be playing the Premier League, they'll be playing the EFL Cup, they'll be playing the UEFA Champions League, Europa League, and UEFA Conference League, depending on who is representing across the different competitions. And then, Jesus Christ, what kind of mistake is that? And then, of course, the FA Cup, which comes in January. So it's going to be action-packed. As we know, the Premier League, it's always a busy, period of December. In December, there's that marathon to get to the halfway mark of the season, which is 19 games played. And then, of course, with the first weekend of January, oftentimes we have the FA Cup games, and things like that. So, and then also in between there, in December, you have the quarterfinals of the EFL Cup. In January, you have the semifinals, and which is a double-legged kind of game. And then in February, somewhere mid-Feb, you do get, the final being played. So it's depending on how far your team goes in that competition, that adds to the amount of fixtures or the litany of fixtures that they do have. Meanwhile, Casemiro and Patrick Dogu are the ones that have been sacrificed or withdrawn for Kobe Mainoo and Diego Dalot. I mean, I find Kobe Mainoo's case quite an interesting issue in this particular case because he's that kind of player who is often been praised by the manager for training so well, and yet he's not been giving him, game time, or at least as sufficient as he would love to have. Nonetheless, he's on to equally sort of prove his worth because you remember in the summer, he's one of those players that he had requested to leave Manchester United, at least on loan, and the club blocked his proposed a move or his desired move because they said they wanted to keep him. Anyways, back to the story of Manchester City. I'll keep you posted in terms of the scoreline between Everton and Man United. And Man United are still really, really pushing hard for that equalizer, but so far it's still eluding them, and we are coming close to the 1 hour mark. So, Newcastle versus Manchester City. Very entertaining game of football. Manchester City dominant in a few affairs of that game, like shots off target, like ball possession, like corner kicks won, and things like that. But Newcastle were the more effective side. I do not know. I think I ought to go back to the Arsenal game, for which Arsenal were really, really dominant, to try and remember the last time I've watched Newcastle give a big team a run for their money. We know that once they went ahead against Arsenal through Nick Voltmada, they made it difficult for Arsenal. And the story wasn't much different from that of Manchester City. Manchester City dominated possession, but when it came to going into the forward areas, Newcastle looked the most threatening of the two sides. Albeit, Manchester City will only have themselves to blame for brought Erling Haaland missing that golden opportunity in the first few minutes of the game. Newcastle sort of caught in no man's land. He sort of chips that ball over Nick Pope and it goes wide of the mark. I think it was Malik Theo trying to run after that ball, but it goes wide of the mark and they missed that very, very good golden opportunity. And overall, in terms of statistics, Newcastle had 5 shots on target compared to Manchester City's 4, but they only had 3 on target. Sorry, 3 off target compared to Manchester City's 9. And like I've said, corner kicks, Manchester City dominated that with 9 compared to 5. But the goals are from 2 goals. That burst from Harvey Barnes was really, really brilliant, with Bruno Guimaraes being involved in those 2 goals. Now, the halftime deadlock. And the reason as to why the deadlock had not been broken by halftime is because Gianluigi Donnarumma was either too good for Nick Voltmada or Nick Voltmada was too poor for to beat Gianluigi Donnarumma, whichever way you want to look at it. But Gianluigi Donnarumma made a couple of saves off Nick Voltmada's attempts that kept Manchester City well lively in that game. Otherwise, it could have easily been possibly 2-0 or even 3-0 by halftime in favor of Newcastle, or perhaps 3-1 in favor of Newcastle, had both sides clinically taken their chances that they had created in that a stanza. And then we had to wait until the 63rd minute for Harvey Barnes to open the deadlock in the 63rd minute. And then about a couple of minutes later, Ruben Diaz, during a set-piece play, Manchester City find the equalizer, but they could not keep a hold of that for long because 2 minutes later, they were back again conceding in a chaotic corner for which they had to check whether there was a Newcastle player in an offside position or whether Bruno Guimaraes came from an offside position to affect play, to contribute to that play before the ball lands to Kenan Hall, who heads into the back of the net to win it for Manchester City. Now, Liverpool having lost to Nottingham Forest. Of course, we know we came into this particular season all singing praises of Liverpool for the right reasons, being the reigning champions, given how well they had recruited in terms of their team. But also, we did point out where they looked vulnerable in as far as their lack of central midfield depth and the back line. The back line it felt light. Oh wow. Burning Boomer forces Jordan Pickford into a brilliant save. United scrap out and win the ball back, but Mason Mount's effort is sent wide of the mark as Man United tried to get an equalizer in this one. So it's still 1-0 in favor of Everton. So, like I was saying, we highlighted Liverpool's weaknesses, but overall they look the better team. On paper, Liverpool have arguably one of the strongest, if not the very strongest starting 11s that there is. However, it's not yet worked in their favor and they've fallen so far off. Now, them having lost and Manchester City having lost to Newcastle, Arsenal had one job to do: take advantage of that and try and increase on the point gap between you and the other title contenders, predominantly Manchester City and Liverpool, at this stage in the season, in that sort of pecking order. Of course, Chelsea have brought themselves into the conversation, and they were always in that conversation, at least in my opinion. If my season table predictions are anything to go by, particularly I for one predicted that they would finish third on the Premier League table. So for those of you that are not aware of that, please go. You'll see. Go to the channel. You'll see that pinned video. It's about my predictions for the 2025-2026 Premier League season. My earlier predictions were that they will finish third, Liverpool second, and Arsenal winning the Premier League title, with Manchester City coming off fourth. Of course, after 12 games into the season, you can see that there's a swap of positions, and significantly for Liverpool in this particular stage. But there's still a long way to go. There's still up to 26 Premier League games still left to play, so a lot can still happen or can still change. But those two having lost, Arsenal needed to take advantage. And it was going to be against one of the hardest games of the season in the North London Derby against Tottenham Hotspurs. But oh my, didn't they blow away Tottenham Hotspurs? They blew away Tottenham Hotspurs. First of all, I do not know, but Mikel Arteta ought to be praised for his ingenious tacticality that he played with a double false nine. I don't know if you guys noticed, but Ebeleche Eze and Mikel Merino were swapping those roles as the two false nines. They're swapping positions. Hi, LFC. Good to have you back on the channel. I hope you're doing well, my brother. So they were playing, swapping those roles. So it almost felt like it was a double twin. But essentially, overall, across the entire game, Mikel Merino was pulling further deeper sometimes compared to Ebeleche Eze. Now, I, for one, in the first 30 minutes of the game, I was frustrated with Ebeleche Eze's lack of fluidity. I felt that he played in a bit of a static manner. You know how Martin Odegaard is so fluid that he gets all over the pitch, goes as deep as the backline, asking for that ball so that he can carry it forward, so that he can spread it across the entire pitch in whichever way he can to drive the team forward. I felt because Ebeleche Eze has been quote unquote been played in the Martin Odegaard role, I had those expectations for him. Now I know that by profile or by stature, by style, he's a bit of a different profile compared to Martin Odegaard, but I thought he could try and mimic that, not to do it perfectly well, but I thought he could be more fluid, he could be more mobile, across the pitch. But I felt a bit frustrated that he was being too static. And I did wonder to myself, was it Arteta's strategy that he plays that way, or he just wasn't reading the game good enough to exercise that fluidity? Because it's not like he does not have that in him. He has it in him. It's maybe just not as good as that of Martin Odegaard. So that's what I sort of felt. And then, of course, we know that he goes on to, score that second, goal of the game in the first half. And then in the second half, he scores a brace to complete a hat-trick to become the first Arsenal player to score a hat-trick in the North London Derby since 1974 or thereabouts. Really, 74, 78, one of the two. That during that time, our own Uganda Cranes were playing at the finals of the AFCON in 78, I think against Ghana. And then in 74, I think they reached the semifinals and something like that. So really, I did feel a bit frustrated. But like I said, and then I was also afraid for Arsenal for the threat that Mohamed Kudus is. But how Mikel Arteta decided to neutralize that was a limitation on his centre-backs on how far they can go. And then Ricardo Carafiori. I don't know if you guys noticed. Ricardo Carafiori did not do the inverting goal, did not do the overlapping thing as you've seen him predominantly do. And the reason for that particularly was to sort of hold that, to sort of stay in position to be ready to tackle whatever challenge Mohamed Kudus was bound to pose for this Arsenal side. And I thought they did that effectively well. I also ought to give flowers in the course of it to Pierre Hincap, who was coming in to fill the void for Gabriel Magalhaes. I thought he really, really did well. One, he did the basics. He did not try to act too smart. He did not try to act be overly confident. He just did the basics. If the ball needed to be smacked away, he smacked it away, and he did that on multiple occasions. But one of them, at one time, it was an effective pass going forward, and it contributes to a goal eventually. And then, he tackled really hard. He had the physical bit of the game, and he was effective with that. And I thought overall he really, really looked good. And the only criticism, or where I thought he lacked, maybe it's not criticism, but where I thought he lacked, I could see that in set pieces, his Arsenal teammates had to sort of show him how to go about it, how they go about their business, how to make those runs. And you could see on multiple occasions they could tap on him, now make the run. In other words, oftentimes they were telling him he is the one supposed to lead the run. I don't know if they were trying to get him to sort of act the role that Gabriel Magalhaes does act when they go for set pieces, or there had been a swap of roles in who was going to be Gabriel Magalhaes and then what his role was going to be in those set pieces. But I felt that he struggled with that a bit. Oftentimes you could see he was looking to his teammates to see on what to do when it came to set pieces. But otherwise, he had a very, very brilliant game defensively. Then I thought William Saliba, I thought in the absence of his leader in Gabriel Magalhaes, he positioned himself as the leader of that backline, not verbally, but in everything he did. He did it so well. Yuan Timber, once again, I mean, what a player. Yuan Timber, what a player. Defensively solid. His physical bit of the game, I mean, he gets it so right that sometimes his diminishing height compared to his teammates is sort of easily forgotten, how he gets into those physical duels, how he fights for that ball. And you could see even late on in the game, he was still sprinting further forward because they used his wing predominantly to do the overlaps, to try and go help Bukayo Saka. And again, you remember when I mentioned my frustration with Ebeleche Eze for his lack of fluidity? A lot of times I felt in the game that when Bukayo Saka made the run, Ebeleche Eze was so further up that pocket of space lacked somebody to fill it. And depending on how quickly the run came, the expectation was that Yuan Timber would come and fill that space, or either of Martin Zubimendi or Declan Rice, but predominantly Martin Zubimendi. Now, if those two were absent and Timber was not there, Ebeleche Eze sort of stayed stuck. He did not drop into this pocket of space to give Bukayo Saka the playing option and try and drag defenders away. So, and that was my bit of frustration. But overall, every time they came forward and Timber had come along in the right moment, he played that role perfectly well. When you go to the second goal that Arsenal do score, it is Timber's cross that is headed out before Declan Rice wins it and passes it back to Ebeleche Eze for Arsenal to score. So he was really, really pivotal in that. And then you could see that he provided the assist for Ebeleche Eze's second goal, and so they were really effective. But I don't know if I'm nitpicking, but out of the appreciation for the tactical bit of the game or side of the game, I felt that was the things that they could have done better, that there was gaps that, they ought to have patched up, particularly in the first half, because in the second half, they were really, really good. You can only fault Martin Zubimendi for somebody who is known for releasing the ball too quickly sometimes, or quick enough. He held onto that ball too long, and Joao Paulinho wins the ball off of him. Richarlison, takes one side. David Raya is miles off his goal line or his box, and he loops that ball over him. Like I've stressed in multiple forums, that wasn't the first time Arsenal conceding such a goal. Now, I do understand predominantly that's how Mikel Arteta tells his goalkeepers to play. Once we are pushing forward, you equally are coming out so that your teammates can play to you whenever they feel like. I understand that. But depending on how far forward your defenders have moved, you ought to have the tactical awareness to say, okay, this is the good position to be. And I thought David Raya should have done better in that moment, because I felt that Hinkap and William Saliba and I think Carafiori were still close by for him to have ventured so further forward that he needs to make so many steps running back to the extent that he needs to turn his face into goal to try and run after that ball. So, and we considered a similar goal against Sporting CP, that's in the UEFA Europa League. We considered a similar goal last season against Crystal Palace in a 2-2 draw. There was also another, possibly the UEFA Champions League. And so there is a pattern of that, So whereas Mikel Arteta demands his goalkeepers to play that way, as a player, of course, the manager is not going to control every movement that you make on the pitch. So you must have that natural sense as a player to know, okay, I must move this far or I must stay this back, So that's up to David Raya to correct. Which takes me to the other thing with David Raya when it comes to Arsenal facing free kicks. You remember the free kick Arsenal conceded against West Ham United last season, I think in their 5-2 victory against West Ham United, scored by Emerson Pereira. Then you remember the free kick he conceded against Bruno Fernandes. Then there was another he conceded against, who was it? I'm struggling to remember. But when he sets up his wall, and I know almost all goalkeepers do the same thing, but the one particular criticism I have for David Raya, once he sets up his wall, he sort of over relies on it, that he creates a huge gap on the side of the goal, depending on where the wall is set up, that's where he's always beaten. Now, once you have and I remember watching the Cycling Geek's podcast by Ben Foster, and he was saying at one point that in some cases, when it comes to free kicks, if goalkeepers had their choice, they would do away with the entire wall, because then it would give them a direct line of sight on that ball. But because they have that wall, sometimes it miscues their vision to see the ball, how fast and when it's played, to get to that position early to try and save the ball. So he's often beaten because he's too far out. He literally moves 3/4. He leaves 3/4 a distance, towards one post, hoping that the wall is going to shield him, which, like many walls, fails, and then he concedes. So he's conceded about 3 or 4 goals of such nature. And every time I watch it, I'm thinking to myself, come on, Inaki, the goalkeeping coach, can't you do something about this? I feel this is a pattern. And if you're not learning from it, something needs to be corrected. He can still set up his wall. Let's say his wall is here. He doesn't need to move. If the post is here, he doesn't need to move here. He can sort of pull a bit here so that he only needs to make 2 steps to drive and save that ball. Because the moment you're taking more than 2 steps, then chances are you're not going to save that ball. So that's the other criticism I have for, Arsenal's goalkeeping position and how everything's spanned. But I thought yesterday they really, really had a good game. Meanwhile, United are still a goal behind against Everton. The game is in the 79th minute. That goal by Kenan Dewsbury-Hall is still the difference. Man United have created, a whole set of goal-scoring opportunities that have fallen to the likes of Mason Mount, Brani Bomo, Bruno Fernandes, but they've so far failed to, find that equalizer at this stage in the game. So back to the conversation of the Arsenal game. Really, overall, Tottenham Hotspurs, they really, really struggled. They were really so poor, and I did not expect Tottenham Hotspurs to be that poor, by the way. I did not expect them to be that poor, but they were so bad, beyond my own imagination. In as far as, when we were previewing the game, my own prediction had been a 2-1 victory for Arsenal. For some reason, I was convinced that they were going to concede. For a game that the sort of sarcastic football community preferred, for lack of a better word, to call a set-piece derby, it had 5 goals, and none of them was a result of a set piece. I found that really, really interesting. But Tottenham set up with, first of all, with the back 3, Cristiano Romero, Mickey van de Ven, and Kevin Danso, with Dijad Space and Destin Udogi sort of playing as wing backs. Then they had Rodrigo Bentancur and Joao Paulinho in midfield. And then they had Wilson Odegaard, Mohamed Kudus, and Richarlison leading, the lines. Of course, in the second half, they brought on Harvey Simmons. Eventually, they brought on Rando Kolomwani and, whatever the other changes that it is they made. But it took until that that opportunity for Richarlison, for Tottenham Hotspurs to get their first shot on goal. In the first half, they had not had a single sniff. They lacked creativity. They lacked drive. Arsenal were just better than them in all aspects. Speaking of being better, Leandro Trossard, what a performance. What a performance from Leandro Trossard. Oh, what a brilliant save from Jordan Pickford. What a brilliant save from Jordan Pickford. Man United were this close to getting that equalizer. Joshua Zirkzee heading that ball. And I don't know, who is that? Michael Keane. What on that screen are you thinking? You're taller than Joshua Zirkzee. How is he heading that ball before you get to it? How is he getting the header before you get to it? It's still a bit scrappy. United trying to get the equalizer, still eluding them. Everton defending really deep in big numbers, but it just feels like that United equalizer is coming. It just feels like that United equalizer is coming. Anyways, so I was saying, Leandro Trossard, what a performance. Declan Rice, again, literally flawless. You can only fault him for that sort of revengeful tackle on Harvey Simmons that he gets himself booked. But, wow, Bruno Fernandes, once again from distance. But it's just a couple of inches over the bar. Couple of inches over the bar, So, but, Juan Timber, Leandro Trossard, Declan Rice, what a performance. And then, of course, Eberechi Eze. It's not every day that you would, again, for me, whereas he scored a hat-trick, I still wouldn't give him a 10 out of 10. Like I've told you, maybe I'm nitpicking. I would give him maybe a 9.5 out of 10. But when it came to going forward, I think there's little to critique about Eberechi Eze in that game. What a performance. So really, for me, if it had not been for his hat-trick, by the way, I was going to give my man of the match accolade to Juan Timber. Clean performance. So energetic. And I fear for him, by the way, because I feel he's played one too many games. Hi, SD. How are you doing, my brother? Good to have you back on the broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. So, for me, if it hadn't been for that hat-trick by Eberechi Eze, hands down, as giving my man of the match accolade to Juan Timber. What a performance. But, whereas I would have given it to Juan Timber, I wouldn't disagreed with anyone if they had given it to Leandro Trossard, because he equally had a beautiful performance. He breaks the deadlock in the 36th minute, thanks to that Mikel Merino brilliant pass, for which Eberechi Eze had attempted earlier on, I think around 8th, 10th minutes of the game. He attempted it for Declan Rice, and Declan Rice, sort of half volleyed it into the legs of Gremo Vicario. So, but Juan Timber, Leandro Trossard, what a performance. Martin Zubimendi, Declan Rice, every Arsenal player was really, really good on their day. They were really, really good on their day. And it just speaks, those 4 goals that Arsenal score out of open play, well, and I remember, I think it was Ian Wright on the overlap prior to this game that said, there was not going to be a set-piece goal in this game. And I think his prediction had been, was it 2-1 or 3-2? No, it was Wayne Rooney who predicted 3-2. I think Ian Wright predicted 2-1. Gary Neville tilted towards 2-1 or 3-2, thereabouts. He was sort of in between. And I think Roy Keane was predicting 2-0 for Arsenal. But that shows you the capability that Arsenal have. Oh, you remember me? Good. I don't always. I rarely forget my usual suspects. By the way, I'm one of those people that tends to remember most. Even if you disappeared for a week or even a month, for as long as you've not changed your name, I will still remember you, because I'm that sort of attached to the people that support this channel. Really, really so much. So thank you so much, SD, for always chipping in, for always, making the time to support what we do on this channel. So thank you so much for the love and support and your kindness. So it was just a good performance. And Arsenal, restored their 6 point lead that they had conceded when they drew away to Sunderland. Like I said, I do fear for Julian Timber. I feel he's overplayed. He's one of those players that needs to be rotated. And let's see, the game in midweek on Wednesday against Bayern Munich, does it come a little too early for his rotation? I certainly do not think so. I'd want to see maybe Ben White feature in that game for purposes of some rotation. William Saliba perhaps gets to stay alongside Pierre Hincap, but because it's too big a risk for Mikel Arteta to play Mosquera and Hincap in that backline against Harry Kane, you need some bit of experience for a defender in that to give you that command. Then at left back, I do not know. I don't know if you'll make the change to give it to Maz Lewis Kelly. I mean, he has not done anything to deserve being out of the team. It's just that Ricardo Carafiori has been good, and that's just what it's been. And in cases where you thought he was going to get a sniff, then Hincap came back into the frame after that injury that he suffered early on in the season. And then the other player that I would have loved to see in yesterday's game, particularly after Arsenal went 3-0 up or before they even get the fourth goal, I thought Christian Nogard could have come on, to also get some minutes. He's one of those players that I think has not gotten enough playing time. Even when Arsenal have been in control of games, there's a phase in the second half where for about 10-15 minutes where Tottenham were at the top of the game, they were dominating possession. And I thought Arsenal needed some fresh legs to run in that midfield. And among the faces I could look to was Christian Nogard on that bench, but he was never brought on. Joshua Zirkzee missing a header from close range, Man United still probing to try and find their own equalizer in this game. We're into the 88th minute of the game. And what in the world it would mean for Everton to come away to Old Trafford and win a game of football, having gone down a man less in as early as the 13th minute. And they are looking to make their own changes, Everton. But it looks like Jack Grealish is already cramping, really. So, anyways. So, like I said, Arsenal did all it takes. The big question is going to be what kind of changes does Mikel Arteta make in midweek against Bayern Munich? Of course, I do not expect him to withdraw Declan Rice and Martin Zubimendi for some reason. I do not know if the game will come too early for Martin Odegaard. There had been speculation that he could feature in the weekend game, but he did not. It was Gabriel Martinelli who returned to the bench, and Noni Madueke, he managed to come on for Leandro Trossard. Victor Gyökeres, we do not know what his curious case is going to be, but either way, he will need to do some player rotation, either in the Bayern Munich game or because after Bayern Munich on Wednesday, they'll be playing against Chelsea on Sunday. Chelsea, who have themselves welcomed back Cole Palmer from injury. He's back in training. He remember he had been out with a groin injury and then he had the home accident and injured his foot. I think it was not a broken foot. I think maybe just a bruise or maybe a bit of a tweak, So basically that's just what it was. And nothing more than that, really. So he is back in training with the rest of the team. Remember, Chelsea have a date in the UEFA Champions League this week against Barcelona. Yes, against Barcelona. And Barcelona, I've seen, I think their traveling contingent includes Rafinha, who equally is returning from injury, but they are going to be without their midfield maestro in Pedri because the fixture comes a little too early. Oh, wow. Jordan Pickford once again forced into another brilliant save. So the game comes a little too early for the likes of Pedri, for the likes of for the likes of Mark Andre Stegen and things like that. Really. So I'm trying to check for the Barcelona contingent, and we see some of the players that are going to be part of that. For some of the players that are going to be part of that, but expect Robert Lewandowski to be part of that squad, possibly. Marcus Rashford, returning to the UK, it's going to be really, really brilliant for him. Of course, Rafinha having left Leeds, what 2 seasons ago, to this being the third season, to join Barcelona, gets to return to the UK and things like that. So yeah, because he left in the summer of 2022. Yeah. So 2022, 2023, 2024. Now, yeah, coming on 3 years, really, ever since he left the Premier League. So, um, I don't know. I'm trying to look for that feed where I saw it in regards to the Barcelona squad that is traveling for that game against Chelsea in the UEFA Champions League. Um, wow. Everton fans expressing their disappointment on the added time, but we're into already the second minute of added time, and Everton just have to hold on to their dear lives and do everything it takes not to concede. I don't care if you have to do a Luis Suarez and bite someone, just do not concede. And Miakalenko, James Tarkowski, Michael Keane. I mean, they've been really, really excellent. They've been really, really excellent. They've done really, really well to sort of stay in this game. And like I said, it's often very, very disappointing for for a team that has had to play with 10 men, lead a game of football, and then eventually concede this very late in the game. It's very, very disappointing, really, and they'll be hoping that won't be the case. Oh, uh-oh, that was cocky. Anyway, brilliant idea it was. But so that's the case of it. Meanwhile, in the other games from the Premier League, of course, Aston Villa managed to beat Leeds. Leeds had taken the lead in that game in a bit of a scrappy goal in the 8th minute that gave them the lead. But Morgan Rogers scored a brace in that one to win it for Aston Villa, who had a goal ruled out by VAR. That goal, sorry, that goal had been scored by Dominic Calvert-Lewin. So, meanwhile, Matthias De Ligt has just missed an opportunity to restore parity for Man United. But we're into the final minutes of added time, and United are yet to find that equalizer. Still eluding them. They've won so many corners, and unlike what Matthias De Ligt was able to do for them in that 2-all draw against Tottenham Hotspurs in the weekend prior to the international break, it's not happened for them so far here. Man United goalkeeper Senny Lomans came for a corner kick, and it did not pan out the way he had hoped. He had to sort of scrap there for a moment. But I think Everton deserve to win this game. I mean, they've really, really done well. They deserve to win this game. One, they've done enough to stay in the game. They've defended with their lives. Jordan Pickford has really, really been excellent in this game. And there's not much you can fault. It's full time. Man United beaten. Looks like they could not find their way back. Having gone a goal down, they could not, and that's what. It kills their, I don't want to call it momentum, because they hadn't lost by the way in a bit. They had drawn a couple of games against Nottingham Forest, against Tottenham Hotspurs, but they had not they had done enough to avoid defeat over the last, I think, 6 games across the Premier League. And yeah, the defeat leaves them in 10th place, where they started the match day from, I think, with Everton moving with Everton moving to an equivalent number of points, like Man United, because Man United had a goal difference of 1, which Everton have really wiped away and made it to 18 points. So beautiful game of football. David Moyes, on his return to Old Trafford, he's managed to get one over Man United. And isn't that brilliant? Brilliant. He's a manager who they had handed a 6-year contract, and they ripped it up and said, "No, you're not worth it. On you go." So, but it's really, Everton really deserved that victory. Man United, they lacked that clinical edge to find an equalizer in that game, later on try to win it. So they will only have themselves to blame. So Arsenal, throughout this weekend, were the biggest margin winners with that 4-1 victory against Spurs, as well as Nottingham Forest with their 3-0 victory against Liverpool. But earlier on, Chelsea had beaten up against Burnley by 2-0. Enzo Fernandez and Pedro Neto, the goal scorers in that game, as Chelsea had reduced the point gap, Arsenal's point gap, to only 3 points. Then Bournemouth fought their way back after going 2 goals down to share the spoils in a 2-2 draw against West Ham United. West Ham's goals were scored by Callum Wilson, while Marcus Tavernier and Unal were the goal scorers for AFC Bournemouth. Then you had the 2-0 victory for Brighton and Hove Albion against Brentford. Brighton having to come from a goal down. That penalty from Igor Thiago in the 29th minute. It needed Danny Welbeck to score to cancel out that lead in the 71st minute before Hedgewood scored in the 84th minute to guarantee victory for Brighton, while Raul Jimenez scored an 84th minute winner for Fulham against Sunderland. Like I said, Morillo, Savona and Morgan Gibbs-White were the goal scorers as Nottingham Forest beat up against Liverpool by 3-0, while Wolverhampton Wanderers lost to Crystal Palace by 2-0. Yeremy Pino and Daniel Munoz are the goal scorers in that game, while then Newcastle, Harvey Barnes, a brace for Harvey Barnes and 1 for Ruben Diaz as Newcastle beat Man City. Then Aston Villa, Morgan Rogers scoring a brace to cancel out, Liverpool's Leeds lead. So as the Premier League table stands, in as far as this the end of match day 12 is concerned, is of course Arsenal with their 6-point lead at the summit of the standings. Chelsea comes second with 23 points. Arsenal have 29 points after 12 games. Remember, they've won 9, they've drawn 2, they've lost 1. Then Chelsea have won 7, they've drawn 2, they've lost 3. Manchester City come third with 22 points, having won 7, drawn 1, and lost 4. Aston Villa come fourth, having won 6, drawn 3, and lost 3. Arsenal will be up against Aston Villa in not so far away. I think it will be the first weekend of December, around that period, Excuse me. And then Crystal Palace in 5th place with 20 points. Brighton 6th with 19 points, as well as Sunderland in 7th place. FC Bournemouth with 19 points in 8th place. Tottenham Hotspurs with 18 points in 9th place, while 10th is Man United with 18 points. Behind them is Everton with 18 points following that victory. And then Liverpool with 18 points in 11th place. Now, guess what? Only 5 points separate a second place Chelsea from an 11th place Liverpool. So that's how small a gap it is. Only 2 points separate 5th place Crystal Palace and Liverpool in 11th place. So below Liverpool is Brentford with 16 points, Newcastle with 15 points in 14th place, Fulham with 14 points in 15th place, Nottingham Forest climbed to 16th, West Ham 17th with 11 points, Leeds, Burnley, and Wolverhampton Wanderers form the relegation zone of the bottom three. Meanwhile, maybe the other keynote way to take away from the weekend was Real Madrid were forced in a 2-all draw against Elche, a result that I must confess I had not seen coming. Not one bit, really. I did not see that result coming for Elche. While Espana beaten up against, Sevilla by 2-1 today. So yesterday, Real Madrid faltered once again. I think, isn't that their second consecutive draw? Because previously, before the international break, they had drawn against Rayo Vallecano, So, but a 10-man Elche still forced Real Madrid in a 2-all draw with Dean Howson and Jude Bellingham scoring there for the equalizers against, Febas had scored in the 53rd minute to give Elche the lead, and then Rodriguez in the 84th minute to make it 2-1. But they've managed to find, the equalizers there. So what that implies is that Real Madrid are moved back nonetheless to the summit of the standings with just a point ahead of the second place Barcelona. So they've won 10 games, 2 draws, and only 1 loss compared to Barcelona's 10 wins, 1 draw, and 2 losses so far in as far as, the standing score in the Spanish La Liga. So Villarreal come in third place with 29 points. So you can see there's only 3 points separating Villarreal with the Real Madrid there in the top spot. And then Atletico de Madrid are also catching up really well with 28 points in fourth place. Real Betis with 21 points, as well as Espanyol. So that's the look of things in there. So in as far as the UEFA Champions League is concerned, tomorrow Benfica will be away to Ajax. Galatasaray will play against Union Saint-Gilloise. That's at 8:45 p.m. in the early kickoffs. Bordeaux will entertain Juventus. Borussia Dortmund will be at home against Villarreal. That's at the Signal Iduna Park. Chelsea will entertain Barcelona. All those games come at 11 p.m. Manchester City will be up against Bayer Leverkusen, while Olympic Marseille will be at home against Newcastle. Napoli welcome Qarabag, while Slavia Praha take on Bilbao in the UEFA Champions League games that will come on Tuesday night. And then on Wednesday, you'll have Copenhagen up against Kairat Almaty, Pafos against AC Monaco in the early kickoffs, while Arsenal will be up against Bayern Munich, Atletico will be up against Inter, Eintracht Frankfurt will take on Atlanta, Liverpool will be at home against PSV Eindhoven, Olympiacos will entertain Real Madrid, while Paris Saint-Germain will be up against Tottenham Hotspur. If Tottenham Hotspur, the kind of Tottenham that played yesterday against Arsenal, is the same team that comes against PSG, they could be beaten 6. Or even more. So take note of that. While Sporting CP will come against Club Rouge there to complete match day match day 5 of the UEFA Champions League in that sort of case. So it's the top of the table clash between Bayern Munich and Arsenal because Bayern Munich, Arsenal, Inter Milan are the 3 teams that are unbeaten in the competition so far. They are not the only ones that are unbeaten, but they are the ones with the perfect record, having won 4 out of 4. Manchester City in 4th place have won 3 and drawn 1, so they are equally still unbeaten. And tomorrow they'll have the chance to perhaps go to the summit. No, I think, do they play on Wednesday or Tuesday? They have the opportunity to perhaps go to the summit of the standings if they can win, and if they can win and with a good goal margin, and perhaps Bayern Munich and Arsenal draw. Very, very difficult game there, by the way, for for both teams in that sort of regard. And it's very interesting to see that top of the table is a German team, an English team, an Italian team, an English team, a French League One team, an English team, a Spanish team. The highest team for Spain is 7th, and that's Real Madrid, but only 3 points off the top. But anyways, potato. Otherwise, guys, it's been a pleasure doing this with you. Thank you so much, SD. Thank you so much, LFC. Thank you so much, Kulen. Thank you so much, Alex Alinaitwe. It's been a pleasure doing this with you guys. Thank you so much for the love and support. Thank you so much for your kindness. Please keep it locked on the Football Tribe UG channel, and I'll do my best to keep serving you. Otherwise, stay blessed, and let's link up again tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. if the time and circumstances permit us. So we will try and digest those UEFA Champions League games that will be coming our way. Of course, we'll be looking at the big ones predominantly. But stay blessed. Let's link up again tomorrow. Bye-bye for now.